So let's go over and have a look. So we've got our exam paper, and this paper is available in the pinned chat. If you want to have a download it and work through this with me, please feel free. I've also put in the chat a copy of my model answers, so you can download that at the same time. So let's grab my black pen, because we need to use our black ink. Why do we need to use black ink? Because all the exam papers, when you have done them, are scanned into a computer, and they are oops, sorry, big clunk there, apologies. They're scanned into a computer, and then they're split up so that examiners never see your whole paper. They don't see your name. All they see is your individual questions. So that's the nicest and fairest way for examiners to mark them. And it is by far the best way for examiners to operate. So use black ink, and don't forget to put all your information on the front. It gives you lots of nice information. It tells you how to answer all your questions. It tells you that you've got an hour and 50 minutes, and it tells you not to forget that this is booklet P, and you need to complete booklet B as well. So booklet P is your American West, and booklet B is your going to be your British depth study. So let's move on from that. Okay, so we start off with our easy question. So this is always our entry level question. So this is designed to be relatively easy. It's designed to be something that everybody can access. And it is supposed to be something that you can pick up a few marks without having to stress too much. So let's just zoom in a little bit more on that, make it nice and clear. So, you think my singing is bad this time? At least, for some reason, my printer has decided no ends for us today. So we've got no ends, I'm afraid. I don't know why that's happened. So there we go, no ends. So yeah, I'm just going to write that back in. No ends today. Sure. Anyway, okay. So that's made me laugh for no good reason. Right, okay. So, yes, this is an entry level question. And it's only 4 marks. Now, the mark scheme just asks you for, let me just grab the mark scheme. It's over here. 1 second. Here we go. So, the mark scheme says, explain one consequence of early settlement in the West in the years 1835 to 1862. It's a analysis of second order concepts, consequence. Yeah, I mean, consequence isn't the question, so we know it's a consequence question. It clearly says it's AO2, which is the consequence section, is worth 2 marks, and AO1, which is the knowledge section, is worth 1 mark. So to get the level 2 answer, you need to say features of the period are analysed to explain the consequence. So in other words, you clearly state what the consequence is, and specific knowledge about the topic is added to support the explanation. So little key there is that it's an explanation, and you show good knowledge and understanding of the period. So in other words, you need to explain why the consequence happened, and you need to explain what happened, in other words. So, one consequence of early settlement in the West in the years 1835 to 1862. I should have pointed out before we started this is that no questions you will see here today you have ever seen before. These are all brand new questions written especially for this video. So they are really good for your revision, and also they're really good for revision because they are they've never been asked before, so they're kind of nice in that if they've never been asked before, there is a good chance that they might come up before. Let's have a look at how we structure this. So we're just going to do a really straightforward point, evidence, explain paragraph, 1 sentence for each. We're not going into huge amounts of detail. It is only a 4 mark question. So there's 4 marks. So we're going to do one sentence for each point of our point, evidence, explain. So one consequence, now point, evidence, explain. Keep it really straightforward. It's only worth 4 marks. So one consequence was increased conflict with Native American tribes. There you go. One consequence was increased conflict with Native American tribes. There's our point. Now we need our evidence, just a little bit of information that's just going to add a little bit of detail. So as settlers travelled along trails such as the Oregon Trail and established farms on the lands, on the plains, sorry, apparently we're not getting peas today either. They moved onto land used by Native American tribes for hunting buffalo. So that's what happened. Why does this cause conflict? Well, this causes conflict. This causes increased tension because the settlers disrupted buffalo herds and claimed land permanently, leading to violent clashes between settlers and Native Americans. There you go. That's it. Very, very simple. It increases conflict. What happens? They move on to land used by Native American tribes, and that causes tension because it disrupts their buffalo herds and leads to violent clashes. That's it. Simple as that. And that is worth 4 marks. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Okay. Okay, so let's have a look at our second consequence question. So you used to have to give 2 consequences of the same question, and now they've changed this because this way you get a much more chance of being able to answer at least one of them. And also I think it's nice to have that variety. This one I think is a harder question. I think that first one was quite easy because you could have had quite a few options there. The marked scheme gives you a couple of options. Increased conflict with indigenous peoples, growth of lawlessness, greater isolation and hardship. So there's a couple of options there. So let's have a look at the second option. One consequence of the Johnson County War. This is a bit more specific, but if you've done your revision you should be good on this one. So this one, the options were the decline of the open range system, the weakening of the political and economic influence of large cattle ranchers, and increased federal involvement in maintaining order. So I went with the easy one, because we always go with the easy one. It's not a competition as to who can write hard answers. We're just going to go with the easy answer because no one wins points for getting difficult answers. We just win points for getting the right answers. So I went with one consequence was the decline of the open range system. We don't have to write, here's the other thing, we don't have to write massive long sentences because it's explain one consequence of the Johnson County War. One consequence was. We don't need to write one consequence of the Johnson County War 1892 was. We don't have time for that. We're in an exam. So don't waste your time. So then we say, little bit of knowledge. The war happened because large cattle ranchers wanted control over unfenced land, but since smaller ranchers and farmers were fencing land with barbed wire. Okay, that's it. That's our little bit of knowledge. So, why does that war lead to the decline of the open range system? Well, because after the conflict, it became clear that land could no longer be used freely by large ranchers, and farming and fencing continued to spread, which brought the open range era to an end. There we go. Simple as that. That's your consequence question. Okay, any questions about that? Stick them in the chat. I'm happy to answer as we go. Please stick your questions in as we go. And also let me know you're here so I don't feel like I'm just chatting to myself like a crazy person. My dog's just sat on my feet, so hopefully she doesn't start pulling wires out. That's what her usual trick is. Okay, let's jump straight in and have a look at the narrative account. Loads of you struggle with this question, but I promise you this is not a difficult question. I think people really struggle with it because it's a weird wording. And like, we're all used to the explain why or the how far do you agree or all of those things that we've seen from Key Stage 2 onwards, right? And we've all done that right from the beginning. But from being like, and then we just kind of get this curveball of write a narrative account, and it kind of blows our minds. But all we're being asked to do really is kind of like give an account of what happened. That's all we're having to do. And it's kind of like, I think actually it's one of the easier history questions we have, because you're not having to make any kind of analytical judgments. You're just having to explain what happened. So let's have a look at how this works. So, this one we're going to have a look at is write a narrative account analysing the key developments in introducing law and order in settlements. So this one is quite a wide breadth, this is covering most of our period, because it's looking at how law and order develops over the whole period. And then it gives us a couple of prompts. It says vigilante groups, and then it says town marshals and sheriffs. Now, a little bit of a heads up about the bullet points of this. All of the exam bullet points have a pattern to them. And the pattern on this one, for the narrative account, is that the first bullet point is always the beginning. And the second bullet point is always the middle. So, the third thing you have to include is always the end. So, it tells you what the beginning is, it tells you what the middle is, and you have to work out what the ending is. So that's kind of nice. That's always really useful to know. So that's always really helpful. And again, the target is the analytical narrative. So in other words, it is an analysis of the causation, consequence and change. So what it's asking you to do is analytical narrative. What the hell is that? In other words, it is saying what caused things, what were the consequences of them, and how did things change over that period. That's what it's asking you to do. And then of course you get your other half of your marks is for your AO1, for your knowledge and understanding. So let's have a look at what we need to do to get full marks. So it says a narrative is given. A narrative, the story, is given which organises material into a clear sequence of events. Clear sequence, what do we call a clear sequence of events in history? We call it chronological order. Yeah, that's all we call it. Clear sequence of events is chronological order leading to an outcome. So there's a conclusion, right? The outcome, and then we can learn to speak. The account of events analyses the linkage between them. So in other words, we say how one thing led to another. We don't just go, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened, and then this thing happened. We say, and then because of that, this other thing happened. That's all we're saying. The account of events analyses the linkage between them and is coherent and logically structured. So in other words, we're not just jumping about, we're making sense. And then accurate and relevant information is included. Easy peasy. So let's have a look at our question. A narrative account analysing the key developments in introducing law and order in settlements. So we've got our beginning. Our first paragraph is going to be about vigilante groups. So let's have a look at our first paragraph. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have a beginning, a middle and an end of our paragraphs. So like we do for the actual whole essay. So our whole essay is going to have a beginning, a middle and an end. But also our paragraphs are going to have a beginning, a middle and an end. And that way we make sure that the whole thing is in chronological order. So where's our beginning? So in the early years of the settlement, law and order in towns was weak because many settlements grew quickly and had no formal legal system. During the California Gold Rush from 1842, in the early years of settlement, law and order was weak because many settlement towns grew quickly and had no formal legal system. So there we go. Let's put that in as our beginning. So they had no formal legal system. Okay, Then our middle bit. So that's where it is. That's where we start off. That's the beginning. There is no formal legal system. Then things develop a little bit, don't they? During the gold rush, mining towns expand, but there were few trained law officers or courts. So the towns are expanding, but they are beginning to have a few courts, but there's hardly anything. And then, as a result of this, communities often relied on vigilante groups to deal with criminals carrying out rough justice such as hangings. So that's our beginning, middle and end of our paragraph. So at the beginning there is nothing at all. Then towns begin to expand, and as a result of this they have to use vigilante groups. Okay, so and then I've got a little sentence that just sort of what's happening. This shows that early law enforcement depended on local citizens rather than organised government control. Then I'm going to go on to my next paragraph, and again this is going to have a beginning, a middle and an end. So what happens at the beginning? Well, towns are beginning to become, wrong colour, towns are beginning to become more permanent. So as settlements become more permanent in the 1870s, more formal systems of law develop, because towns are becoming more permanent, as we saw in the previous paragraph. Okay, growing towns begin to appoint town marshals and elect sheriffs to enforce the law, and courts and what does that say? Jails were established. Okay, so that's our middle, and then our end bit is in cow towns such as Dodge City. New rules were introduced, including bans on carrying guns within town limits. So, beginning, towns are becoming more permanent. Then they begin to appoint town marshals and elect sheriffs to enforce the law, and courts and jails were established. The end of this paragraph is cow towns such as Dodge City, so the bigger towns begin to introduce new rules, including bans on carrying guns and that sort of thing. Little mini paragraph to wrap it all up, mini sentence. This marks a shift from informal vigilante justice to structured law enforcement as communities become more stable. Okay, and then finally my end paragraph. So I've done my first paragraph according to my bullet points. I've done my second paragraph according to my bullet points. Final paragraph is going to be my last one. Again, it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and the end is over on the next page. So, where do we start? By the middle of the late 19th century, federal influence over law and order had increased, because we've got these cities that are beginning to have new rules. What's happening? The expansion of the railways. Communication makes it easier for the federal government to extend its authority across the West. And in serious conflicts such as range wars or disputes involving active Americans, the US Army was used to restore order. And then as a result, by the 1890s, law and order in the West, there we go, was more organised and controlled, showing a clear move from local self-policing to stronger government authority. So we've told a clear story. We've gone from there being very little organised town legal systems, them very much using vigilante groups to deal with and handing out rough justice to deal with crime, through the town marshals and larger cities handing out new rules, right through to federal organised law enforcement. So all we've done there, it's not complicated. We're just telling a clear story with links between each event. Okay, any questions on that? Please stick it in the chat. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not a really complicated question. You just need to tell that clear story. And remember that the question paper for this is in the pinned chat, and also the model answers for this are also in the chat. So feel free to just pop in and have a look at those. Okay, right, finally we're going to have a look at the explain why questions, and I want to have a proper chat about these because I think, again, this is the other one that throws people. Because I think lots of you have a look at this kind of like explain the importance of 2, and you all know that this 2 is really important, but I think the other half of this kind of like scares people. It's like the explain the importance of 2. But I wanted to show you something. I sat down and I told you, because other people have lives, I sat down and I wrote down every explain the importance of question that's ever come up, and I wrote down the second half of the question, and I wrote them all down in a list, and then I compared them, and I wanted to show you something. There has been 4 main groups. So you have the indigenous, so these are all the explain the importance of something 2. So these are all the 2 after the 2. Okay, so the ways of indigenous people's lives, the Plains Indians' way of life, conflict with the Plains of Indians, relations with the Plains Indians way of life. That's all of those have all come up. Okay, I would put them all together and say that that is something that you could revise. So you could say, right, I've had a look at the way that the indigenous people's lives have changed over that period, over our revision period. What have you just pulled out, dog? Missy? No, I think we're good. Come out. Come out, come out, come out. Good girl. Okay. Something's vibrating. 1 second. The dog has pulled something out from under the cable. There's a dog. Oh, you're a little dog. I think we're good. Hopefully you can still hear me. Ah, she's so cute, but she's such a pain. Oh, right. Where were we? Oh yeah, so this is something you can revise, right? You can go, okay, so I'm going to look at the progression of the lives of the indigenous people of the plains throughout the period, and look at all the different things that affect them and the different ways that their lives are affected during this period. And then by the time you come into the exam, you're going to be like, okay, so I don't know, let's have a look. Have I got one that's yeah, I have, because there you go, I've got the importance of the Wounded Knee Massacre, and you're just going to be like, yeah, I know how the Wounded Knee Massacre affected relations between the Plains Indians. I've got that sorted, because you've revised the way that the Plains Indians' way of life is affected during this period. So that's a really good way of revising this. Rather than looking at each individual event, look at the way the Plains Indians' way of life is affected, and then look at how each event affects that way of life. So that's a really good way to revise this question. So the other three, key kind of themes that keep coming up are dealing with law and order in the West. That's only come up twice, but that's not to say that it won't come up. The development of the plains, so the development of the plains, settlement of the West, growth of settlement, early migration to the West, settlement in the West, migration to the West. I would say, again, these are all kind of the same thing. And then finally, the cattle industry, cowboys' way of life, ranching on the plains, cattle industry, farming in the West, all very, very similar. So it's worth kind of looking at these themes and then revising those themes, and then using those themes as a revision tool to then look at how those events that come up later affect those different themes. And that will put you in really, really good stead to answer the 2 8 markers, which at the end of the day are half your marks on this paper. So if you've got those two questions, the half your marks on those papers, because when we come to mark these, almost always we see one of these questions people do well and one of these questions people do really badly. And this is half your marks, guys. So it's worth looking at how you revise this question and revising it in a completely different way. So with that said, let's have a look at these questions. Let's have a look at what's being asked of you, and let's have a look at how we can answer it. So let me do a little bit of zooming in, a little bit of focusing, make it nice and clear. There we go. So again, you have to explain two of the following. You can choose either or. Go with the two easiest. Don't feel like you'll get more marks if you go for a harder one. You won't. Just go for the ones that you feel like you can answer best. Again, as usual, you get half the marks for AO2, half the marks for AO1. This is about consequence and significance. So significance and consequence are slightly different things. Consequence is the thing that happened as a direct result of something. So, for example, let me think. Trying to think of something that's a direct result. So, for example, the breakdown in relationships between the US government no, my brain's gone. Can't do anything today. Yeah, so it's something that happens as a direct result of something. Consequence, but a significance is why something is important, or how important something is. So you could say that the Wounded Knee Massacre leads to further breakdowns of the relations between the US government and the Plains Indians, but you might not say it is the most important factor, that there are other important factors, and that's the difference between consequence and significance. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So let's have a look at what we need to do to get the top marks. So an explanation is given showing analysis of importance. So these are going to be point, evidence, explain paragraphs. So whenever we're doing point, evidence, explain, we know it's not going to be analysis because it's only a level 3 answer. So it's point, evidence, explain. It is 1, 2, 3. An explanation is given showing analysis of importance. It shows a line of reasoning that is coherent and logically structured. In other words, your answer makes sense. Accurate and relevant information is included, showing good knowledge and understanding. So your explanation is given, you've shown why it's important, and your answer makes sense. That's what they're asking for. So let's have a look at my answers and see what we can come up with. How are we doing for time? We're doing good. Okay. Excellent. So let's have a look at the first one first of all. So explain the importance of beliefs about land and nature. Let's highlight it because this is one we're going to do first. Explain the importance of beliefs about land and nature to the Plains Indians' way of life. So this one's a little bit of an unusual one. The reason I've included this one is because they haven't had, I can't remember if it's any or hardly any, questions about the Plains Indians, hardly any. Questions about the Plains Indians' way of life, and they do tend to fill gaps in their question. You know, if they haven't had any questions about certain topics, they do tend to fill it using these questions. They explain the importance questions. So there is a good chance that this sort of, if they're trying to fill a gap in the spec, that this is where they will come up. So. This is quite a nice one, really. I think this is a nice question because we all know these ones. The nice questions that we did right at the beginning of the module about beliefs about land and nature and that kind of thing. So, this is a lovely one. You want to be aiming for 2 paragraphs. You want to be aiming for just explaining why it's important. So we're going to do a point, evidence, explain paragraph. My printer still doesn't want me to have any consonants. I don't know why. I love that though for me. No consonants for me, okay? It's P's this time. I'm not allowed P's. I don't know what's happening here. Oh my goodness. No P's for me. There we go. Right, let's do our oh my goodness, I love it. Right, let's have a look at our point evidence explained paragraphs. So, one reason that beliefs about land and nature were important was that they shaped how Plains Indians used the land and organised their society. So there we go. Nice and straightforward. So now I'm going to add my knowledge. What do we know? Plains tribes believed that the land was sacred and could not be owned by individuals. We know that, that's lovely. And saw themselves as part of nature rather than separate from it. This meant that land was used communally and tribes moved seasonally to follow buffalo herds and across the plains. There we go. Just a bit of knowledge. Now I need to link this to this. So I need to say, why does this mean that it was important to their way of life? Their beliefs are important to their way of life. So because land was not viewed as private property, Plains Indians did not fence or permanently settle it, which supported their nomadic lifestyle and allowed them to survive by hunting buffalo, meaning their spiritual beliefs directly shaped their economic system, housing and movement patterns. There you go, nice and straightforward. So because they believed that land did not belong to them, they basically didn't settle the land. Easy peasy. I now need another point, which again should be nice and straightforward because do a bit of focusing up. It's not very focused. Just a second. There we go, lovely. Okay, so that's really straightforward. I'm not going to highlight this one, but let's just quickly have a look. So beliefs about nature were also important because they shaped the plains. No P's for me. Indians' relationship with the buffalo and their means of survival. The buffalo were also considered sacred. So that's my point. Buffalo were also considered sacred, and religious ceremonies such as the sun dance, oh no D's this time, showed respect for nature. Every part of the buffalo was used for food, clothes, teepee covers, demonstrating both spiritual respect and practical dependence. So that's my evidence. And then the belief system reinforced careful use of resources, communal hunting practices, and ensuring survival in a harsh environment and strengthening tribal unity. So spiritual ideas about nature were closely linked to daily life and long-term survival on the plains. So there we are. There's my explanation. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, lovely jubbly. Right, so let's just have a quick look at the other two. Explain the importance of. So we've got one more. We've got the Mormons. So this is explain the importance of the Mormon migration to settlement in the West. This one is again, so the importance of the Mormon migration. Again, we're not just talking about the importance of the Mormon migration. We are talking about how the Mormon migration is important to the settlement of the West. So we need to focus on that. So why is it important? Because it creates a successful and well organised settlement in the West. And then that's my point. Then a little bit of evidence, which is just what happened. Brigham Young led the Mormons to the Great Salt Lake, and then they used irrigation channels to dry farm the land, which shows, so that's my evidence, and then my explanation is that then shows that the settlement in harsh Western environments can be done, basically. That's my explanation, is that it just shows that it can be done. rather than having to do unstable mining camps, they can actually set it up as a permanent farming system. And then below that, we've got my other thing is that it extended American settlement and influence further west. So this is sometimes a tricky one. I actually had a bit of a problem with this one, because I was like, okay, so one thing is it shows that we could do it. The other problem I had was like, well, what else does it show? And I was like, well, I don't know. And I sat there and I kind of struggled. And this is why, if I'd have sat down in an exam to pick which two I was going to do, I'd have actually done 1 and 3 here, because I was like, I could probably do 2 things about this one and I can do 2 things here. I would have struggled. I maybe would have gone like, I can come up with 1.5 for this one. So I would have gone for 1 and 3. But because I'm not in an exam, I had time to think about it. So I came up with a second one. But in an exam period, I'd have just binned it off. But I went with an extended American influence, basically. So by extending the large community in Utah, thousands of miles from other eastern states, the Mormons increased the American population in the region. So that's my evidence. And then that's significant because it's a permanent settlement. It strengthened US claims to the land and encouraged further migration because people had a place to go. So that's my explanation. Okay, and then my final one, the one that I would have gone with if I'd been in an exam and I hadn't had time to think of a second point, is the wounded knee question, because I think the wounded knee question is an easier question. And that's what I'm saying about don't be afraid to go with an easier question. Okay, so Izzy, I will answer your question in a second. I did see it. I will absolutely answer your question in a second. And it involves having my butt kicked by my friends. So I will answer it in a second. One reason that the Wounded Knee Massacre was important. So before I do that, what's our question? Is the importance of the Wounded Knee Massacre to relations between the US government and the Plains Indians. So my 2 points this time are going to be, it marks the end of organised armed resistance on the plains. So in other words, unfortunately, it marks the end of the organised resistance, and that it destroyed any remaining trust between the Plains Indians and the US government. There's my 2 key points there. So what evidence do I have for those? Well, my first bit of evidence is that in December 1890, US troops opened fire on the Lakota people at Wounded Knee Creek, killing around 250 men, women and children after attempting to disarm them during fears about the ghost dance movement. So I'm not making any judgments there, I'm just giving the evidence, okay? I'm not giving my judgment evidence, I'm not giving my judgment, I'm just adding evidence. And then my explanation is, why does that matter? Well, it's important because it showed that the US government would use overwhelming military force to suppress native movements. And after this event, there were no major armed uprisings, meaning relations shifted from open conflict to enforced control on reservations. So in other words, the Native Americans, the Plains Indians, felt that there was nothing they could do to fight back against the US government, unfortunately. So there's my explanation. And finally, it destroyed any remaining trust between the Plains Indians and the US government. The Lakota involved at Wounded Knee were already living on reservations and were not engaged in war, yet the army treated the ghost dance as a threat and responded with violence. This confirmed that the government no longer aimed to negotiate or honour earlier agreements, but instead prioritised control, deepening resentment among Plains tribes and marking a final breakdown in relations between treaties and compromise. So there's my evidence and there's my explanation. So hopefully that all makes sense. Hopefully that's fairly straightforward. this paper is by far the least well done paper, because I think people really panic about it because these questions don't come up anywhere else. But they're not anything you need to panic about. They are really straightforward questions. They are only level 3 questions. They're not level 4 questions. You're not having to do analysis. You're not having to do anything that is particularly dramatic. You are just mostly explaining what happened. So, nothing is above an 8-mark question. Nothing is above a point evidence explain paragraph. If you stop, you take your time, and you take it slowly, you can absolutely get your top marks on these questions. Any questions on this paper at all, stick them in the chat, stick them in the messages underneath. I will come back to you and I will help you out with these. I answer all questions fairly quickly, allowing for sleep and eating and all of those things. I do come back and answer questions fairly quickly, so I'm always happy to help. Otherwise, that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. Izzy, I did say I was going to answer your question, and I apologise. And the answer is yes. I have to get someone to kick my butt. I have got like 2 videos left to do for Cold War, and then I'm going to take a mental sabbatical because Cold War is it's just been killing me. I hate it so much, but I am absolutely going to finish it in the next few months, like couple of months tops, like absolutely. Definitely before the exam. And then, yeah, but next week we're going to be doing Henry VIII, and we're doing a couple, I'm doing a few off-piste videos over the next few weeks because there are a few people who don't get these walkthroughs, who never get these walkthroughs. American West is one of them because you just don't get them. You get Cold War walkthroughs, you get Germany walkthroughs, you get Medicine Through Time walkthroughs, but people like doing the slightly more undersubscribed papers just don't get them. So I'm going to be doing Henry VIII next week. So if you know anyone who's doing Henry VIII, let them know. But otherwise, I am available pretty much all the time. Stick a comment in the chat if you want any questions answered. Otherwise, I will see you all next time. Thanks for joining me.